What happens when Hollywood royalty walks into a talk show expecting a lighthearted chat, only to find themselves ambushed by a host determined to take them down? What unfolded on The View that morning wasn't just an interview. It was a collision of wit, ego, and raw power that left everyone watching in stunned silence. Joy Behar thought she was about to corner Robert Downey Jr., a man who's faced a worse life could throw at him and still risen to legendary status. She came armed with her questions, her smirk, and her usual brand of sarcasm, ready to expose him on national television. But what she didn't count on was that Robert Downey Jr. isn't just a movie star. He's a survivor, a man who's rebuilt his entire life from ashes. And what followed was a masterclass in composure, intelligence, and the art of turning an ambush into a victory. Before we get into the full story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, do you think celebrities should have to tolerate these so-called tough interviews, or should they stand their ground like Robert did? Now, let's dive into what really went down. The atmosphere inside the studio was electric the moment Robert walked onto the stage. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause, cheering for the man they'd come to know and love as Iron Man himself. Robert smiled, waving to the audience, that unmistakable charm lighting up the entire room. You could see the genuine excitement on the faces of the other co-hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and Alyssa Farah Griffin, who all greeted him warmly. But there was one person who stood out, Joy Behar. While everyone else was clapping and smiling, Joy leaned back in her chair, arms folded, wearing a sly grin that told the audience she had something up her sleeve. Well, Joy began once the cheers subsided, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Look who decided to join us. Robert Downey Jr., the man who thinks he can do no wrong. The words hit the air like a slap. The laughter died instantly. You could feel the energy in the room shift. Robert's smile faltered for a brief second before he composed himself again, leaning back casually in his chair. "Good morning, Joy," he said with that signature cool tone that could disarm anyone. "That's quite the warm welcome. Are we skipping the pleasantries today and heading straight for the deep cuts?" The audience laughed nervously, sensing something was brewing. Joy's smirk widened. She thought she had him rattled. "Oh, I think we both know why you're here, Robert," she said, leaning forward slightly. "This isn't just about promoting your new movie, is it? This is damage control." The audience murmured. Joy's tone had that sharp edge she was infamous for. "Let's talk about your past, the arrests, the drugs, the rehab. Do you really think you're the right person to be playing a hero for children?" The room fell dead silent. You could feel the tension like static in the air. The other hosts exchanged uneasy looks. Whoopi shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable, while Sarah avoided eye contact altogether. Joy, however, wasn't done. "I mean, come on," she continued, voice rising slightly. "You've made some terrible choices in your life. What makes you think parents want their kids looking up to someone with your history?" For a moment, Robert didn't respond. He just looked at her, calm but unreadable. Behind that calm exterior, though, there was a flicker of something deeper, resolve, the kind of strength that comes from surviving public humiliation, personal battles, and the brutal climb back to redemption. Finally, he took a deep breath and spoke, his tone calm but firm. "You know, Joy," he began, his voice smooth as ever but with an unmistakable edge, "I think there might be a misunderstanding about what kind of conversation we're having today. When my team told me I'd be coming on The View, I assumed this would be a friendly conversation. Talk about my work, my recovery, maybe even a few laughs. You know, something your audience might actually enjoy. But if this is about digging to the past to score cheap shots, then that's not the show I thought I walked into." His words were measured but powerful, each syllable landing like a quiet thunderclap. The audience stirred, some nodding, others watching in awe. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze, sensing the shift in tone. Robert wasn't angry. He was controlled, precise, and devastatingly articulate. And in that moment, everyone watching knew that Joy Behar's plan had just backfired spectacularly. Talking about the stigma that keeps people from getting help. That's what honesty looks like. Joy. That's what courage looks like. But this, Robert gestured between them, his expression calm but unyielding. This isn't courage. This is spectacle. This is a host trying to make herself look powerful by shaming someone who's already done the hardest thing a person can do: face their past and rebuild. The audience murmured softly, a ripple of discomfort spreading through the room. Even the crew members were still, watching as Robert Downey Jr., the man once branded as Hollywood's ultimate cautionary tale, now stood metaphorically 10 feet tall, commanding an entire stage without raising his voice. Joy forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, come on, Robert," she said, her tone strained but still trying to maintain control. "You've been through all that, and you come out stronger, right? Shouldn't you be able to talk about it?" Robert tilted his head slightly, that faint, knowing half-smile returning. Not one of amusement, but of measured disbelief. "You know, Joy," he said quietly, "it's not that I can't talk about it. I've spoken about it many times, in interviews and speeches, to people who are actually trying to understand recovery. But there's a difference between talking about something and being interrogated about it by someone who just wants to get a reaction." His words landed like a quiet explosion. You could almost feel the weight of them in the air. He leaned forward now, his eyes locked on Joy's, unwavering. "You see, when I talk about my past, I do it to show people that it's possible to change. That rock bottom doesn't have to be the end of the story. But the way you're framing it, the tone, the phrasing, it's not about insight or growth. It's about shame. You're not asking because you care. You're asking because you think you can corner me. And that's where you've miscalculated." The audience began to murmur again, this time more audibly, the unmistakable sound of shifting allegiance. What started as a tense ambush was now turning into a public reckoning, with Joy Behar squarely on the defensive. Robert didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried more force precisely because they were calm, deliberate, surgical. "You know, Joy," he continued, "I've played villains. I've played geniuses. I've played broken men trying to put themselves back together. And I've learned something from every role, about compassion, about self-forgiveness, about perspective. But sitting here right now, I realize the hardest thing any of us can do isn't acting. It's empathy. It's choosing to listen instead of judge. It's choosing to understand instead of condemn." By now, even the other co-hosts were visibly moved. Whoopi nodded slightly, her face unreadable but clearly supportive. Sarah looked like she wanted to applaud. Alyssa was just staring at Robert, wide-eyed, as if she couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Joy tried again, her voice smaller now. "I didn't mean to judge you. I just think people want honesty." "Then let's be honest," Robert said, leaning back slightly, his tone soft but unrelenting. "You didn't invite me here to be honest. You invited me here to relive a version of myself that doesn't exist anymore. You wanted a headline, not a conversation. But the truth, Joy, is that I'm not that man anymore. I've done the work. I've made peace with my past. Have you?" That final question hit like a hammer. The room went completely still. Joy blinked, visibly thrown off balance. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Robert let the silence linger for a long moment before continuing, his voice almost gentle now. "Everyone has chapters of their life they're not proud of. The difference is, mine were public, and maybe that's why I've learned to be kinder, to others and to myself, because I know what it's like to be broken and still choose to get back up." A hush fell over the studio. The energy that had started as hostile tension had transformed into something else entirely: respect, even admiration. Finally, Robert looked toward the audience, giving a small nod. "If there's anyone watching this who's struggling with addiction or self-doubt," he said sincerely, "don't let people like this." He gestured briefly toward Joy. "Define who you are. You're not your mistakes. You're the choices you make after them." The audience broke into applause, hesitant at first, then louder, until it filled the entire room. Joy sat back in her chair, her smirk gone, replaced by something that looked an awful lot like regret. Robert smiled faintly, stood up, adjusted his jacket, and said simply, "I think that's enough honesty for today." Then, with the grace of a man who had just reclaimed the entire narrative, he walked off the set to a standing ovation. It wasn't just a comeback. It was a redemption on live television. And everyone watching knew they had just witnessed Robert Downey Jr. do what he does best: Turn pain into power and silence his critics without ever losing his dignity. Robert's smile was absolutely disarming, measured, calm, and yet filled with the unmistakable confidence of someone who had just seized total control of the moment. "A misunderstanding," he repeated softly, tilting his head slightly as if genuinely considering her excuse. "No, Joy, I don't think this is a misunderstanding. I think this is exactly the tone you meant to set. The problem is, you didn't expect me to respond the way I did." His voice carried that quiet, cutting authority that didn't need a shout to dominate the room. "You thought you could define this conversation with guilt and shame, but the truth is, those things only have power when you give them permission to. And I stopped giving them permission a long time ago." The audience broke into scattered applause, sensing that something monumental was unfolding. Joy glanced nervously toward the other co-hosts, perhaps hoping one of them might jump in, but none did. Whoopi was sitting with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Sarah looked sympathetic toward Robert, while Alyssa seemed frozen, her eyes darting between the two like she couldn't quite believe what she was witnessing. "Look," Joy began again, trying to recover some semblance of control. "This isn't personal, Robert. It's part of my job to ask the tough questions." Robert chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Tough questions are fine, Joy. But what you asked weren't tough questions. They were cheap shots disguised as journalism. There's a difference. A tough question challenges someone to think. A cheap shot just tries to provoke. And if you can't tell the difference, then maybe it's time to start asking yourself why." The line landed like a thunderclap. Even through the television cameras, you could feel the shift. The moment Joy Behar went from interviewer to cautionary example. Robert leaned forward slightly, his tone still conversational, but every word cut sharper than the last. "You know, I spent years rebuilding my life from the ground up, not because I had to for the cameras, but because I wanted to be someone better for myself, for my family, for the people I've hurt. I learned accountability. I learned humility. And I learned that people are far more than the worst thing they've ever done. But what you're doing right now, this public shaming, this little performance, it's exactly why so many people never get the chance to change. Because the moment they try, someone like you is waiting to drag them back into the mud for ratings." A collective murmur swept through the studio audience. The tension that had once favored Joy was now completely gone, replaced by a mixture of awe and discomfort as Robert Downey Jr. calmly dismantled the narrative she had tried to build. Joy blinked rapidly, clearly struggling to find footing. "That's not fair," she managed, her voice thin. "I've always supported people trying to better themselves." Robert gave her a look of weary compassion, like a teacher gently correcting a stubborn student. "Then maybe start showing it, because compassion isn't just something you talk about when it's convenient. It's something you practice, especially when it's uncomfortable." His words hung in the air for a moment, heavy and undeniable. Then he leaned back, his composure effortless. "I don't need your approval, Joy. I don't need this platform to validate my growth. I came here because I thought we could have a real conversation, one that might inspire someone watching to believe that redemption is possible. But instead, we're here playing this little game of, let's see if a celebrity cracks. It's boring, and frankly, it's beneath you." That line hit hardest of all. Joy's lips parted, but nothing came out. She looked like she wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she knew there was no point. The audience, once silent, erupted into applause. Some even stood. Robert didn't gloat. He simply smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said everything without needing to say more. "You know," he said as the applause died down, "the funny thing about recovery is that it teaches you patience. It teaches you to recognize what's worth responding to and what isn't. And this," he gestured around the table, "isn't worth anger. It's just sad." He turned toward the audience, that unmistakable Downey charm shining through again. "If you're watching this and you've ever made a mistake, don't let anyone convince you you're defined by it. You get to decide who you become, not them." The room was silent, except for the sound of cameras clicking, recording a moment that would be replayed endlessly online. Robert stood, straightened his jacket, and gave a polite nod to the co-hosts. "Thank you, ladies. It's been enlightening." And with that, he walked up the stage, calm, collected, and absolutely victorious. leaving Joy Behar staring down her cards. The queen of daytime television dethroned by a single, devastating lesson in grace under fire. Devastating in his politeness, Robert's tone was calm but razor-sharp, every word slicing through the tension in the studio with surgical precision. "Oh, I don't think there's been any misunderstanding at all, Joy," he said evenly, his eyes locked on hers. "I think you were perfectly clear about your intentions. You wanted to embarrass me, to make me squirm, to score points with viewers who might enjoy watching someone get taken down a peg. The problem is, you picked the wrong target, and you used the wrong ammunition." He rose to his feet, adjusting his jacket with that effortless grace that reminded everyone exactly who he was. This wasn't just Robert Downey Jr., the man who had publicly battled addiction and clawed his way back from rock bottom. This was Robert Downey Jr., the global superstar, the cinematic icon who defined a generation of filmgoers. "You see, Joy," he continued, his voice steady, powerful, and commanding the full attention of the room. "I've been where you're trying to drag me today. I've been broken. I've been humiliated. I've lost everything. But I've also rebuilt. I've learned. I've grown. And most importantly, I've learned to recognize when someone is trying to use my past against me. I've learned exactly how to handle it." The audience was silent, completely enthralled. Joy's usual confidence had evaporated. Her hands trembled slightly as she shuffled the note cards in front of her. "Robert," she said quickly, forcing a brittle smile, "I really think you're overreacting to what was meant to be a straightforward interview." Robert laughed, a low, genuine sound that carried an unmistakable edge. "Straightforward?" he echoed, his eyes narrowing with amused disbelief. "Joy, let me give you a piece of advice. When you decide to ambush someone, when you decide to try and humiliate them on live television, you better make sure you're prepared for them to fight back. And you better make sure you're better at it than they are." Gasps rippled through the studio. Cameras zoomed in, catching every flicker of emotion on Joy's face as Robert delivered what would soon become one of the most replayed moments in talk show history. "Because here's what I've learned," he said, pacing slightly now, his voice rising with conviction. "In this business and in life, the people who try to tear others down, who weaponize someone's lowest moments, who mistake vulnerability for weakness, those people are almost always the ones terrified of their own reflection, the ones who don't want anyone looking too closely at their lives." Joy's face went pale, her mouth tightening. The implication was devastatingly clear, and everyone in the room understood it without him needing to say another word. "So before you come for someone's recovery," he continued, his tone now calm but unyielding, "before you try to shame them for their past, before you twist their honesty into entertainment, maybe ask yourself what that says about you, as a journalist, as a professional, as a person." He turned toward the main camera, his focus shifting from Joy to the millions watching at home. "And to anyone out there who's struggled, who's fallen, who's been told they'll never come back from their mistakes, don't you dare let people like this convince you that your past defines you. It doesn't. Your growth matters. Your recovery matters. Your second chance matters, and no one gets to take that from you." The audience erupted into applause, not the polite, cute kind, but real, thunderous applause that came from witnessing something powerful and unfiltered. Joy sat motionless, her eyes fixed on her desk, the queen of daytime television dethroned before a live audience. Robert turned back to her, his signature smirk returning, charming, confident, but carrying the unmistakable edge of victory. "Joy," he said smoothly, "it's been absolutely enlightening talking with you today. I think your viewers have learned a lot about who I am and about who you are. Thank you for giving me the chance to show them the difference between talking about redemption and actually living it." The applause grew louder, filling the studio. His words lingered in the air long after he had finished speaking. Joy's co-host looked on in a mix of shock and admiration. Whoopi Goldberg gave a slow nod of respect. Alyssa Farah Griffin mouthed, "Wow." Even the producers behind the cameras seemed frozen in disbelief. Robert started toward the exit, then paused, glancing back one final time. "Oh, and Joy," he said with a knowing smile, "next time you want to have a candid discussion about difficult topics, make sure you're ready for the conversation to go both ways." With that, he walked off the stage, poised, unbothered, and completely in control. The applause followed him all the way out. Joy sat frozen, her face pale, her show shattered by a masterclass in grace, strength, and unshakable dignity. As the broadcast cut to commercial, one thing was certain. This moment would go down in television history as the day Robert Downey Jr. turned an ambush into an awakening.